Welcome back from morning tea, and I invite you to take your seats. And having just enjoyed your morning tea, once again, a huge thanks to all of our sponsors. Each of them we see displayed on the screen here. So tēnā koutou I ngō koutou aroha ki tēnei kaupapa, I tuku huruhuru mo te kaupapa nei. We thank them for their generosity and their benevolence. So a round of applause for our sponsors, ladies and gentlemen. Were it not for our sponsors, I might have had to put a hangi down in the backyard yesterday so they all have something to eat. Welcome back for our second session, ladies and gentlemen. Our taumata, it's actually our second taumata. Ngā mahi a muri atu I te arotake, a panel discussion, accelerating action beyond the status quo. And we're fortunate this morning to have Gill Greer, who will chair our panel of wonderful experts. Gillian has held leadership roles in Rare Disorders New Zealand, the National Council of Women, Volunteer Service Abroad, International Planned Parenthood Federation, and New Zealand Family Planning. Her work focuses on gender equality and human rights and has included service delivery, advocacy with the United Nations, government and communities, and across the sectoral coalitions. Gill was previously Assistant Vice-Chancellor, Human Resources and Equity at Victoria University. She's also a teacher, a writer, a mentor, facilitator and speaker, and co-wrote the People's Report on the SDGs. Nō reire te whaia tēnā koe.
Kia ora tātou, ko Gill Greer tēnei. This is not on your program, but it is luckily on ours, so I'm not really subverting things. We have been given, Moko and I, 7 minutes to talk to you briefly about, here's the commercial, the People's Report, which is up online on its final draft, but by the end of this week will be final, full stop, no draft, we hope. And just to tell you a little bit about that and why we did it, and if you prefer the Reader's Digest version, you will see that there is a pamphlet around. We're going to show and tell here. You can tell I'm a teacher. Thank you. The People's Report has been reduced to this size in the hope that we hope it will go to libraries, to schools, that those people we've been talking about who wouldn't have a clue if you say, what are the SDGs? In fact, I said to someone in a government agency the other day, well, we're working on the SDGs. She said, what are they? And then I said to a parliamentarian yesterday, would you like to form a cross-party group? And she said, Jill, I don't think we're doing the SDGs. I said, no, I'm not sure you are either. It gives me great pleasure to be back at Auckland University. When I left, I think I was the youngest graduate at the time, a long, long time ago. And I left with a degree that I've always joked that I would never have employed me. So I'm really lucky to be here now as one of its oldest alumni, I think. Thank you very much indeed. So the People's Report, I'm going to start by saying what it's not. It's not an academic report. It's a snapshot from over 25 people about what they or their organisation are doing and how they see our delivery of the SDGs. We were going to be more academic with footnotes and everything else. You'll see they're noticeably absent. There'll be a few more probably at the end of the week. But the point was, this is what people gave us. It represents the rich diversity of civil society. At the same time, we did a survey of about 186 people to ask, has the government talked with you about the SDGs? Are you working with government to implement the SDGs? Do you have a climate or sustainability policy? And what recommendations would you make? So that's what you have here. And the full report will be online, and it will also go, when it's final, to government agencies as well, together with a policy pack of recommendations. We were asked by Hui E, who set up a small steering group, to do this work. It took us a little while to find Moko to join me, and we tried to do it very much on a treaty and partnership model. We presented at the United Nations last month, and our question at the UN through the major groups asked by Ronya Ivers, who is here from Hui E, was, will the government commit to working with Māori, civil society and business to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals? Our ambassador, who's a great guy and an old friend, didn't have time to answer our question amongst the others, and we're still going to be working towards getting that answer, like all of you. And part of the reason for doing it is because we hope that you will be part of whatever goes forward from here today, and that we can be too. It gives some benchmarks, it gives some very personal pictures. I have to say that probably I find it profoundly disenchanting to be involved in reading every one of those entries and writing a few of them. I think it is a damning indictment of where our country is. And so our questions will be concentrating on what are the gaps between the VNR and what should be, how can we close them, and what can we do collectively. I'm just going to ask Moko to come up, and as she comes, you'll wonder why are there so many recommendations. Well, to be honest, the steering committee said to us, why aren't there 3? I said, from my point of view, when the Millennium Development Goals were formed, George Bush spoke to Kofi Annan on the top floor of the UN. Family planning was taken out the day before the goals were announced. It took us 7 years to get them back, and in that time many people died, many women died who need not have died. And for those of us today in civil society, we spend a huge amount of time. I've just worked with rare disorders, 400,000 New Zealanders. I couldn't get to meet a minister, I couldn't get to meet the Director General. They fall between the gaps. Someone said, but they don't have a disability. Think about some of those people with rare disorders. And I also went to mention Maria, and if you're interested in the data, Maria is from the School of Government down in Wellington and has briefly mentioned the database as well. So over to Moko, who's kept me under control.
O tēnā tātou, nā kanohi hau tēnā koutou, nā kanohi mohi ana tēnā koutou, he uri taku no te tai rāwhiti no te tanga māhaki, ko Moko Morris ahau, tautokuna mihi kia muhia, kia ora o te iwi konei. So one of the challenges of doing the report was everyone gave us these beautiful taonga and these words and these desires, and so trying to put that into words and move forward was quite difficult. As Māori, we operate locally really well. It's our default setting, and so through exercising our rangatiratanga on our whenua, together we can come collectively together to exercise kotahitanga, for a bigger cause. It was a bit challenging doing the report, but what I had to keep asking myself is what would it look like without the report? So we had to start somewhere, and we had to bring all these together in the mixed bag that it looks like. But our deepest desire was to represent the civil society and the aims and the goals. So I guess the most important question for us is where to from here. So it's really important that we move forward in a coordinated way, in a collective manner, and in a way that represents the goals for what they are and our responsibilities. Kia ora.
Kia ora. And as we move over for the others to talk about their particular views, and they are outstanding examples, I just want to say one thing. The people that we were able to meet at the UN when the government presented its report, what really struck us was the localisation of the SDGs. The work that people were doing at the local level was far more profoundly about human rights than, in fact, if I had said to them, what do you think about the covenant on, for example, the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, at which point their eyes would glaze over. So I think localisation, and with all that, my one request to all of you, 2 requests. One is make sure that every person standing for local bodies is asked about the SDGs. The second is if anyone can tell me who the academic was who said, it's time to stop borrowing money we don't have, to buy things we don't need, to impress people we don't care about, I'll be hugely grateful.
Gillian, moko tēnā kōrua, and before I hand it over to Gillian to guide us through the panel discussions, we have a brief video to play.
Kia ora. Can I just introduce, first of all, Kevin Hague, who needs no introduction, I think, the Chief Executive of Forest and Wood. Thank you.
I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā iwi o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Can I begin actually by expressing gratitude to Gill and Moko for the People's Report and to Hui E, because that report is considerably better than the Voluntary National Review. I'll cut to the chase, because we've been asked to talk about the gaps in the VNR. What I heard from the Prime Minister in her address this morning was a now familiar rhetoric of change, but what we see in the VNR is actually pretty much a familiar same old. And that's a narrative about a plucky bicultural country that's doing lots of things in this area. And I can pretty much recognise the paragraphs that have been contributed by each of the various ministries who've put that report together. But what it misses is what I think we actually heard from Jeffrey Sachs this morning, and to some extent from Right Honourable Helen Clark, is what I think is the basic and most important fact, which is that despite all of those goals, in the areas that I'm familiar with at least, actually the situation is getting worse, and it's getting worse across the board and pretty quickly. It seems to me that that's the issue that perhaps we ought to have focused on. Forest and Bird works across land, sea, freshwater and climate, and we're working to protect and restore nature. Well, we are one of the few countries in the world with the highest rate of endemic species. So we are one of the world's treasure troves. We are the country in the world with the highest proportion of our native species at risk of or threatened with extinction. And that's now in excess of 4,000 species. 2/3 of our ecosystems in decline. Some of our ecosystems, sadly, pretty much lost. That is a disaster by any terms. And we have some fantastic work being done by DOC and by community groups around the country to actually bring back some of our species. We have over 100 species that have active efforts to restore their populations in the sea of 4,000. It's hopeless. We need to change the system. Minister Parker is fond of quoting Herman Daly, who says, that the economy is a subset of the environment and not the other way around. He's absolutely right. And that same idea is inherent in the work of Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Institute, Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, which is compulsory reading if you haven't got to it already. But fundamentally, it's about the relationship between the economy, the environment, and people. So we've got things set up right now so that the environment and people are effectively inputs into the economy. And it should be the other way around. We should be setting our environmental goals and our social goals and retooling our economy so that it delivers on those goals. And that's the place that I think the SDGs could play in our country. And it's absolutely the role that they are not playing at the moment. Got all the ministers in the room, please put your hands up. Not of religion. Yeah. And I think that goes to my fundamental point. What we have to do together is to change this dynamic that sees these international agreements as almost just a treadmill of compliance, bureaucracies that does not actually engage with or drive any of what we do domestically. So that's what we need to change, just our economic system and our government's engagement with those international agreements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm introducing, as he comes up, Arend, who is the Director of Surgery at the Auckland ADHB and is leading what I consider to be accompanied by their Manager of Sustainability, Madula, who's here somewhere. I think a remarkable story in terms of how the SDGs can be implemented and reported on and make a difference in all sorts of settings, including district health boards. Thank you so much. You will, if you look at the People's Report, you will see an interview with Arend, which will tell you much more than he's able to tell you today. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Jill. Ko tōku manawa o ko tamariki izi rao ko Rory, tōku kahu araha ko Fiona. Ahakoa no nahau e wha ahau ko tōka nahau waiwai ko Mohua. Ko tōka awe araha ki te angata. Ko Arend Merrie tōka ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. So, health in the SDG era is complex, and it really demonstrates the interplay of all the different SDGs into the health space. And the NVR describes it, as we just heard Kevin said really nicely, the overall gloss of what's happening in the health space, but really just underpinning and underlying that, there are other challenges. And if we look at climate and health, the interplay gets really complex. And there's no mistake that in the Zero Carbon Bill submissions, there were 11 district health boards plus multiple medical interests submitting to this because of the massive impact on health on our environment. We've taken this on board at the DHB, and this is very much at a local level. And Manjula's here in the audience today, who's been driving a lot of this. But since 2015, we've managed to reduce our carbon emissions by 28%. But I'd argue that actually that's the easy stuff. I'm going to give you a fly-through of the impacts of health and the gaps in the VNR, starting perhaps with poverty, with 19% of our children in this country living in food poverty, with the number of food grants skyrocketing. So we see this through the local mission here, we see this around the country, that the need is high. And for those of you who don't understand equity, this is a real stark example. This is looking at deprivation indices and the life expectancy for women in New Zealand. And the standout here is that if you are Pākehā in the most deprived area in New Zealand, you have a better life expectancy than a Maori woman in the least deprived area. There's a common theme coming through this. In surgery, which is the pointy end that I work in, there's certainly problems if you have areas of deprivation, but we see that Māori are at 16% higher risk of dying from surgery. We know the statistics that came out the other day that our young Māori men, our rangatahi, are the ones who are at risk of suicide. And if you have this one thing I could urge you to read, it is this, a window on the quality of Aotearoa New Zealand's healthcare. This catalogues inequity after inequity, and that exists within our health system. So moving from health, what are we doing in the gender space? Well, we know that our data, again, is stark. We have 194 family deaths with a gender preponderance of men. And unfortunately, in this space, we are seeing Māori overrepresented in the deceased and the offenders. And we look at our impacts on homelessness coming under SDG 11, the need for homelessness. In this city alone, we have had 20,000 Aucklanders meeting the definition of homeless, with a 35% increase in the last 5 or so years. So we are not doing well in the areas, and the societal areas in the SDGs. What can we do? So at a local level, we've undertaken a materiality matrix at our DHB. This is very much hot off the press. But you can see that health, whilst it's the most important, it's the areas of poverty, equality, education, clean water that are really making the difference. We need to transition from a high-carbon health system to a low-carbon health system. That's one with a patient and whānau-centred care with leaner pathways leading to a reduction in carbon. But we've talked about the Swedish models being described. But the piece that's missing here and has been eloquently described is putting the treaty at the centre of this when we're designing it. The model of Maori health equity, which is a balance of equity and Maori health with the treaty, is something that we can take across all the SDGs, taking just the word health out, and we would see the impact that we can have. This has already been referred to. This is the model of the model that we should be adapting perhaps of a different economic piece, but if we don't have our social foundation right, we're not going to be able to address the planetary ceiling. So I refer back to this, that we really not only need to paddle in unison, but we need to accelerate that paddling. And if I could take from the recent Hāora documentation, the Waitangi Tribunal first report into health, the words of Lady Tuariti Moxon, what more can be said? Now it's time to put recommendation into action. Thank you.
Kia ora, Arend. It won't surprise you to know that when I interviewed him, he said, it's about kaitiangatanga, it's about manakitanga. If we get it right for those who will benefit most, we will get it right for everyone. And now it gives me great pleasure to again introduce someone who needs no introduction. Come on up, Sophie. You will notice in the report there's an SDG 18, what I always call the missing goal, which is young people. I told my mother many years ago, I'm not having children look at the mess you've made of the world. It was Vietnam, of course. So Sophie, you're not here just because you're a representative of young people. You're here because you're a leader. Thank you so very much from all of us for what you've done.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko wainui tuku maunga, ko wainui tuku awa, ko St Peter's Hall, tuku marae, no paikakiriki aho, ko Handford awa ko Pidford o Kufano, ko Sophie Handford tō ingoa. We are all leaders of today. A simple definition is that leadership is the art of motivating a group of people to act towards achieving a common goal, working with the group to come up with a vision. With the climate crisis being the biggest threat humanity has ever faced, we are going to need some bold, visionary leadership to bring everyone along as we set out to save the world. The common goal must be to safeguard this planet. This is our only home. As a young person, I'm often led to believe that I'm a leader of tomorrow. And we found when organising the first school strike for climate in New Zealand, we were met with the reply of, stay in school, or why don't you do this on a weekend? But when our leaders aren't showing any urgent action in addressing this crisis, it becomes up to us young people to show this leadership. We must step up and be leaders of today, otherwise our planet might not survive. We might not make it through. Sitting by and watching the water swallow our Pacific Islands, hearing of hundreds of species going extinct, seeing some of our youngest tamariki not even know the state of what their future might be, that really doesn't sit well with me, and that doesn't sit well with the 10-year-olds that are helping us organise these school strikes nationally. It doesn't sit well with the 70 people we have in our national organising team for School Strike for Climate in New Zealand, and the 20,000 young people who went on strike for climate justice with us on March 15th and May the 24th. We only have 11 years to seriously reduce our emissions. We cannot stand by and watch this unfold. In this time, we need to see serious and bold changes made by our leaders and those worldwide, but also action from ourselves in this room. We need system change, but we cannot have this without the power from the grassroots. Everything is on the line. To succeed, we must first believe that we can, and it will take all of us. These SDGs aren't just for our politicians, as was said earlier. We could be the generation and the group of people that save the world. Now, I see a huge gap in the area of vision, ambition, and justice. We could be creating the best possible New Zealand that we all want to see through taking action on climate change and some of these massive issues that are in our path. We can be reducing inequality, improving well-being, and reducing Indigenous injustice while bringing about climate justice. The SDGs are inextricably linked. We at School Strike for Climate are demanding climate justice because the solutions to climate change should decrease inequalities, not perpetuate them even further. We must ensure that the transition is intergenerationally just because what we don't do now, future generations will inherit the repercussions of. I don't see the kind of ambition we need with the IPCC report saying we have to halve our emissions by 2030 in order to stay below 1.5 degrees of global warming and be carbon neutral by 2050. But it seems like New Zealand's just using these targets, which are a bare minimum, when we, a developed nation with a small population, have the potential to be a leader. We have the potential to show the rest of the world what is possible. And we need to be in a place where our young people aren't having to have sleepless nights because of the impact that climate change will have on their future. We have an obligation under Te Tiriti o Waitangi and to our Pacific neighbours to take this crisis seriously and act now. Now, if my home was burning down around me, I probably wouldn't just go into the lounge, close the door and hope it wouldn't reach me. I'd grab the fire extinguisher and I'd put it out. We need a plan. How are we going to bring everyone along with us? How are we going to mitigate the crisis? How are we going to adapt to the crisis? How are we going to ensure that solutions are bringing people together and decreasing the inequalities that we see in our world instead of further perpetuating them? Now, tackling climate change is going to take more than just going through the motions and ticking things off a checklist, like achieving lots of these SDGs. I think we need to think of humanity like a web, an ecosystem, and use our diversity to come up with more innovative solutions by using the strengths of everyone in this so-called web. Now, not just the web of big corporations, of lawyers, of activists, of writers, but of everyone. We all have strengths, we all have something to give, and we all have something to contribute when it comes to securing our collective future. Let's use our skills to put pressure on our elected representatives, those who are supposed to be safeguarding this planet for future generations. Let's use the people power that we have collectively, because united, we can never be divided. Collective action can mean working with a few friends, it can mean working with your family, your school, your workplace, 20,000 young people. We need all forms, and it starts with that first conversation. Now, I said at the beginning, we are all leaders of today. So let's empower each other to discover our role in the solution and our role to achieving these SDGs. Jane Goodall said, "Only if we understand can we care. Only if we care will we help, and only if we help shall we all be saved." Kia ora.
And so to close, I'm going to borrow an African whakatoki to say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, take others with you. Please join your hands for all of the panelists showing this Sophie.
Gill, Kevin, Arend, Sophie, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā hoki koutou mo te pai o tā koutou whakaputa pepeha hei mua atu wā koutou kōrero. Can I just say how marvellous and heartwarming it is to hear, particularly in the lead up to Māori Language Week, everyone who has stood to speak so far provides something of a Māori greeting, or if not a full Māori passport and CV declaration via their pepeha. So thank you very much for that. It really is very much appreciated. The floor have a number of questions to ask. Time is short, so perhaps we'll go with one of the first ones here. As youth, we're confused. On one hand, we're told that we need to change systems. On the other hand, we're often disempowered. What can youth do to change systems? Go for it, Sophie.
Is that on? Yeah, cool. I can totally relate to feeling incredibly disempowered and incredibly overwhelmed, and that is what brought the School Strike for Climate movement to Aotearoa, was me feeling extremely scared, extremely overwhelmed, and extremely disempowered. But I got together with a few friends, And we said, you know, we're actually all feeling pretty disempowered. And I think, as you said, as youth, we're confused, and we are confused. So I think we need to come together as a generation of young people and talk about why we're feeling disempowered, and then work together on doing something about that, and also trying to empower others, because I doubt it isn't just youth that are feeling disempowered and slightly overwhelmed by this crisis. So I think, just connecting with other people and trying to empower each other, whether it just be starting from your group of friends and then expanding that outwards. But I can relate to that so much.
I just want to, I completely agree with that. I think that on climate change, that Sophie's absolutely right, that lots of people are confused, and they're confused in part because of a completely mixed message that our governments have sent. On the one hand, they've been saying climate change is a really important threat and we need to be doing something about it. On the other hand, they're not doing anything about it. So it's inevitable that the population will feel, well, is it really important or not? And I think what the School Strike for Climate underlines is that leadership can come from anywhere, and we cannot afford to be waiting for government to actually lead. We have to lead ourselves, and ultimately success will come from a coalition of community voices and governments working together.
Kia ora, and perhaps just this last one, which has popped up right up to the top. How can the private sector with big profit margins contribute more to this cause, more for this cause?
Could I pick up on that one? I just want to give you an example, and there are a few people here in the room, of volunteer service abroad. They have a partnership, for example, with Downer. 4 young cadets every year spend 3 months. 2 young men, for example, insisted on private sanitation facilities for girls in the Solomons. Together, they worked with local people, building capacity and learning so much themselves to build 21 libraries, rebuild 21 libraries after the cyclone, school libraries. That, to me, is an example of what the private sector can do at its best. And we cannot stay with the old stereotypes. You know, people will look at me and say, oh, well, you know, she's an NGO, she's a greenie, she's a lefty. And I could look at somebody and say, well, look, they're a rapacious, greedy capitalist. But in fact, probably neither is true. There are good NGOs, there are bad NGOs, there's good private sector, and we need a new model of convergence. SDG 17 is absolutely right, and it was rated lowest by the NGOs on our survey. That's terrible. We need to have government and the private sector and NGOs and community and, of course, academia, a part of civil society and a leader, or we wouldn't be here today, working together. We can't afford not to.
Arend, kia ora,
Just in response to that, is not maybe big profit, certainly not big profit in health, I have to say, but in big sectors, the need to involve youth is critical, and certainly for our materiality matrix, we reached out to Gen Zero and others, and point you in the direction of the Auckland 2050 map, where the rangatahi involvement in that has been a really good example of partnership for youth. In terms of how else we can do it, what we don't see much of in New Zealand is social business or social enterprise, and big profit business can support and facilitate social business, social enterprise, which is a really good mechanism for, I think, achieving many of our goals that government aren't managing.
Kia ora, Arend, and once again, thank you to all 4 of you. Thank you for making time this morning to be with us, and I can now finally describe how exactly your e-certificate will be presented and what it will go towards. So to show our appreciation for your time, 15 metres of the Waitakere River at the Mātuku Link will be restored with native plants and trees in your and your fellow speakers' honour. Tēnā koutou, Mātuku Link is a 37-hectare native forest in Auckland's Bethells Valley, home to rare birds such as the fernbird. We are proud to be supporting the Restoration Education Centre by partnering with Million Metres. So kia ora koutou.